His lieutenants are positioning themselves for the coming power struggle. And the people of Mexico, the ordinary citizens who have endured decades of cartel violence, are watching and waiting and hoping that this time somehow things will be different. But deep down, most of them know the truth. In the Mexican drug war, killing the king does not end the game. It just starts a new round. And the next round is always bloodier than the last. This video is dedicated to the men and women of the Mexican Special Forces, the Army, and the National Guard who lost their lives during the operation in Jalisco and in the violence that followed. Their sacrifice in the line of duty will not be forgotten. We honor their courage, their discipline, and their service to their country. Glory and honor to those who fell. Our deepest condolences to their families. Subscribe for more stories about the hidden forces that shape our world. Real stories told unfiltered, because understanding what happens in the shadows is the first step toward bringing light. See you soon. Every time a major criminal organization fragments in Mexico, the result is more violence, not less. The Mexican government faces an enormous challenge. The operation that killed El Mencho was a tactical masterpiece. It demonstrated the capability and courage of Mexico's special forces. It proved that even the most protected criminal leader can be found and eliminated. But tactical success does not automatically translate into strategic victory. The real test comes in the months and years ahead. Can the government maintain security in the territories previously controlled by the CJNG? Can it prevent the succession wars from spiraling into uncontrollable violence? Can it address the underlying conditions, poverty, lack of opportunity, corruption, that create an endless supply of recruits for criminal organizations? Can it protect the communities that will be caught in the crossfire as competing factions fight over El Mencho's empire? History suggests that the answers to these questions are not encouraging. The Mexican drug war has been going on for 2 decades. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Billions of dollars have been spent. Dozens of high-value targets have been captured or killed. And the drug trade continues. Fentanyl continues to flow across the border. Violence continues to claim lives. And new leaders continue to emerge from the wreckage of destroyed organizations. El Mencho is dead. The man who built the most violent cartel in Mexican history bled out in a military helicopter over the mountains he once ruled. His body lies in a federal forensic facility in Mexico City. His empire is fracturing. Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, known as La R, is the most visible and most controversial candidate. He is famous for propaganda videos showcasing the CJNG's military capabilities and for ordering high-profile acts of violence. His loyalty to El Mencho's family was total. But his impulsive confrontational style could be a liability if the organization needs to lower its profile and avoid further military operations. The problem is that none of these 4 men has the combination of authority, respect, fear, and strategic vision that El Mencho possessed. El Mencho spent over a decade building personal relationships with every regional commander. He resolved disputes. He allocated territory. He managed finances. He maintained discipline through a combination of financial reward and the credible threat of extreme violence. No successor can simply step into that role. The most likely scenario is fragmentation. Regional commanders who previously answered to El Mencho will begin operating more independently. They will make their own deals with suppliers, negotiate their own arrangements with corrupt officials, and control their own territory without central oversight. Some will align with L03 and the family faction. Others will gravitate toward El Jardinero. Others may strike out on their own or seek alliances with external organizations. This fragmentation will almost certainly lead to increased violence as competing factions fight over territory, routes, and resources that were previously allocated by El Mencho's central authority. We have seen this pattern before in Mexico. When the Guadalajara cartel collapsed in the late 1980s, it fragmented into the Sinaloa, Tijuana, Juarez, and Gulf cartels. When the Beltran Leyva organization split from the Sinaloa cartel in 2008, it triggered years of bloody conflict. When Los Zetas separated from the Gulf cartel, the resulting war killed thousands. No clear heir. No agreed-upon process for transferring power. El Mencho never named a successor. His biological son Ruben, known as El Menchito, is serving a life sentence in the United States. His brother Antonio, known as Scarface, was extradited to the U.S. The family members who might have had the legitimacy to claim leadership are either dead, imprisoned, or out of reach. Four figures have emerged as potential successors, each with different strengths and different weaknesses. Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as L03, is El Mencho's stepson. He has the advantage of family connection, which provides symbolic legitimacy within the organization. He led the Grupo Elite, one of the CJNG's most aggressive cells. But family name alone does not guarantee authority in the narco world. Senior commanders who have been building their own power bases for years may not accept leadership from someone they see as owing his position to marriage rather than merit. Audias Flores Silva, known as El Jardinero, is considered by many to be the most operationally capable candidate. He controls synthetic drug production along the Pacific coast and manages security across Nayarit, Michoacan, and parts of Jalisco. He is known for business discipline and military-style leadership. If the CJNG prioritizes stability and financial continuity, El Jardinero is the logical choice. Heraclio Guerrero Martinez, known as LTO, controls operations in Michoacan with deep connections to local armed groups and fuel theft networks. His knowledge of the terrain and his relationships with port operators in Lázaro Cárdenas and Manzanillo make him strategically important. But his profile is more regional than national. He is an operator, not a leader of a global organization. His son, known as R1, was killed during the operation against El Mencho, which adds a personal dimension to his position in the aftermath. But behind the official statements and congratulations, the reality was more complex. The mention of bilateral cooperation with the United States in the official Defense Ministry statement was particularly revealing. That phrase was not decorative. In operations of this magnitude, signals intelligence, metadata analysis, intelligence fusion, and ISR platforms provided by American agencies are often decisive. The tracking of satellite communications, electronic patterns, digital signatures, and logistical movements is an area where American agencies maintain a considerable technological advantage. Reuters reported the involvement of the Joint Interagency Task Force Against Cartels, a structure under U.S. Northern Command designed specifically to map, dismantle, and strike transnational criminal networks. A former U.S. official speaking anonymously confirmed that a detailed dossier had been constructed on El Mencho. However, both American and Mexican officials emphasized that the operation was designed and executed by Mexico. Mexican soldiers conducted the assault. No American military personnel were on the ground. The intelligence was shared, but the blood was Mexican. Now comes the question that everyone in Mexico is asking. What happens next? And the honest answer is that nobody knows. Because El Mencho's death has created a power vacuum inside an organization that was built entirely around one man's authority. Unlike the Sinaloa cartel, which evolved into a federation of semi-autonomous factions, the CJNG operated under a centralized vertical command structure with El Mencho as the absolute authority. That model gave the CJNG extraordinary discipline, cohesion, and the ability to project power across Mexico and internationally. But it also meant that when the leader fell, there was no established mechanism for succession. Public transportation was suspended across multiple cities. The state government activated its maximum alert level known as Código Rojo. The governor Pablo Lemus Navarro confirmed the high-impact operation and urged residents to stay indoors. Hotels were advised to keep guests inside. Embassies issued warnings to foreign nationals. The violence spread beyond Jalisco within hours. Guanajuato, Michoacán, Nayarit, and Aguascalientes reported similar incidents. Then Tamaulipas and other states hundreds of kilometers from the epicenter began experiencing narcobloqueos. The geographic expansion suggested a coordinated response designed not to control territory, but to generate maximum chaos across the country. By the end of the day, the scale of the response was staggering. Multiple states were experiencing simultaneous disruptions. Military and National Guard forces were deployed across the country. Highways were shut down. Cities were locked down. It was one of the largest episodes of narcobloqueos and federal security deployment in recent Mexican history. The human cost was real and immediate. According to information available at the close of February 22, 21 members of the National Guard lost their lives in the line of duty. 18 members of the Mexican Army and 3 officers were also killed. 13 additional security personnel were wounded in various incidents across the country. 3 Special Forces operators who participated directly in the assault on El Mencho's position were among the dead. They gave their lives to complete the mission. President Claudia Sheinbaum publicly congratulated the Mexican Army and National Guard, validating the operation and sending a clear political message of institutional support. Secretary of Security Omar Garcia Harfuch highlighted the participation of the Mexican Air Force and Army, emphasizing the interinstitutional coordination that made the operation possible. The official confirmation came at 11:10 in the morning when the Secretary of National Defense released a statement confirming that Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes had died. The statement carefully noted that he had been captured alive but succumbed to injuries sustained during the operation. From a legal and operational standpoint, this was classified as a capture followed by death from combat injuries. Not an execution, not an instant kill. A distinction that matters for legal documentation and international perception. The body of El Mencho, along with that of El Sapo, arrived in Mexico City at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon under heavy security protocols. The body was received by specialized forensic personnel and transported to federal facilities. The destination was the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Organized Crime, where formal identification procedures were initiated. In cases of this magnitude, visual identification alone is insufficient. Complete forensic protocols were activated, including autopsy, fingerprint analysis, DNA comparison, dental forensic examination, and detailed photographic documentation. These procedures not only confirm identity, but establish the exact cause of death and preserve the chain of custody. The reaction from the CJNG was immediate and devastating. Within hours of the news breaking, the cartel launched what security experts call urban terrorism of distraction. This is not random chaos. It is a calculated strategy designed to overwhelm the state's capacity to respond. By forcing security forces to deal with fires, roadblocks, and attacks across multiple locations simultaneously, the cartel dilutes the pressure on its critical operational areas and buys time for its remaining leaders to reposition. In Jalisco, cars were set on fire on major highways. Supermarkets were burned. Buses were attacked. Government buildings were targeted. Roads were blocked with burning vehicles and debris. According to multiple witnesses, the armed helicopters opened fire on ground positions, while Special Forces units advanced along the rural roads leading to the ranch. The gun battle lasted approximately 2 hours. El Mencho's security detail fought back with everything they had. These were not ordinary guards. They were his most trusted fighters. His Praetorian Guard. They were armed with assault rifles, heavy machine guns, and rocket launchers with anti-armor capability and the potential to threaten low-flying aircraft. They had armored vehicles. They were prepared to fight and die for their leader. 4 members of El Mencho's inner security ring were killed during the battle. 3 others were critically wounded. Among the critically wounded was El Mencho himself. Also among the wounded was one of his most important lieutenants, Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, known as El Sapo, who was identified as one of the most violent and strategically important operators within the CJNG. The military also seized armored vehicles of artisanal construction known as monstruos or narcotanks. They recovered rocket launchers, high-caliber assault rifles, and light machine guns. The firepower assembled at that ranch was equivalent to what some small countries' militaries possess. According to the official account from the Mexican Secretary of National Defense, El Mencho was not killed instantly during the battle. He was captured alive but critically wounded. He was evacuated by military helicopter, presumably headed for Mexico City, where he would receive specialized medical treatment. But he never made it. El Mencho died during the aerial transfer. Somewhere between the mountains of Jalisco and the skies over central Mexico, the most powerful drug lord in the country bled out. He died not in a prison cell, not in a courtroom, not in a dramatic last stand, but slowly bleeding in the back of a military helicopter while the forest that had hidden him for years disappeared below. And the local power structures in many of these mountain communities are older and stronger than the Mexican state itself. For years, El Mencho had used this landscape to stay hidden. He moved constantly between secured ranches, safe houses, and mountain camps. He traveled with a small but heavily armed security detail. He avoided electronic communications. He trusted almost no one. His operational security was legendary. But something brought him to that ranch near Tapalpa on that particular weekend. Maybe it was a meeting. Maybe it was rest. Maybe it was overconfidence. Whatever the reason, El Mencho was there, and the Mexican military knew it. The first signs came on February 21st, the day before the operation. Residents of the exclusive Tapalpa Country Club complex reported something unusual. 2 military helicopters circled the area, made a couple of passes, and then withdrew. It was subtle, not alarming enough to trigger a full alert. But in retrospect, it was clearly a reconnaissance flight. The military was confirming the target location and planning their approach. The next morning, everything changed. Around 7 in the morning, as dawn was breaking over the pine forests of the Sierra Madre, residents reported seeing 4 military helicopters in the sky. These were not ordinary aircraft. They were UH-60 Blackhawks armed with M134 miniguns. They were accompanied by 2 T-6 Texan II aircraft from the Mexican Air Force. This was not a patrol. This was an assault force. At approximately 7:20, the helicopters began making tighter circles over the Tapalpa Country Club area and the ranch known as El Pinto, located about 7 kilometers from the center of town near a dam called the Nogal. Minutes later, the first shots were fired. They diversified into extortion, illegal mining, oil theft, human smuggling, and control of legitimate businesses. In some regions of Mexico, the CJNG had more power than the government. They controlled local economies. They influenced politics. They collected taxes from businesses. They provided jobs and security in areas where the state was absent. They became the government in all but name. And at the center of it all was El Mencho. He ran the organization with absolute authority. Every major decision flowed through him. Every regional commander answered to him directly. His word was law, and disobedience was punished with death. He never named a successor. He never shared power. The CJNG was his creation and his alone. That made the organization extraordinarily disciplined and effective. But it also created a fatal vulnerability. The entire empire depended on one man. And on February 22, 2026, that man was found. The operation that killed El Mencho began long before the first helicopter appeared over the mountains of Jalisco. Intelligence agencies had been building a picture of his movements for months. The Mexican government, working with intelligence provided by the United States, had been tracking patterns. Communication intercepts, surveillance data, informant reports, and analysis of logistics movements were all being compiled into an operational picture that would eventually lead to a specific location at a specific time. The location was a ranch called El Pinto near the town of Tapalpa in the mountains of Jalisco. Tapalpa is what Mexico calls a pueblo mágico, a magical town. It is a tourist destination known for its pine forests, cool mountain air, and rustic cabins. It is a place where people go to escape the heat and noise of the cities. But it is also deep in CJNG territory. The mountains around Tapalpa are remote, difficult to access, and perfect for hiding. The forests provide natural cover. The terrain makes ground operations difficult. He worked as a bodyguard for the cartel's leaders, positioning himself close to the center of power. He was known as calculating, cold, and loyal to no one but himself. He watched the leaders above him and studied their mistakes. He noted their weaknesses, their indulgences, their lack of discipline. And he waited. Around 2010, the Milenio cartel began to collapse. Internal conflicts, leadership arrests, and pressure from rival organizations tore the organization apart. Its remnants scattered into smaller factions. And Nemesio saw the moment he had been waiting for his entire life. He gathered the most loyal and capable fighters from the old Milenio cartel. He recruited former military personnel and corrupt police officers. He armed them with the best weapons money could buy. And he founded his own organization. He called it the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generation, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. From the very first day, Nemesio ran the CJNG unlike any cartel that had come before. This was not a loose confederation of traffickers. This was a military organization with a clear chain of command, strict discipline, and a willingness to use violence on a scale that shocked even Mexico's hardened narco world. He created propaganda videos showing convoys of armored vehicles and columns of uniformed fighters marching in formation. He sent messages to rival organizations and the government that were designed to terrify. He attacked police stations. He ambushed military convoys. He assassinated government officials. He made it clear that the CJNG was not afraid of the Mexican state. The CJNG grew at a speed that stunned law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Within just a few years, the cartel was operating in dozens of Mexican states. They were trafficking methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, and eventually fentanyl into the United States, generating billions of dollars in annual revenue. They established international networks reaching into Europe, Asia, South America, and beyond. He was careful. He was disciplined. He was patient. But in 1992, his luck ran out. Federal agents arrested him for heroin trafficking, and he was convicted and sentenced to prison. Most people would see prison as the end of their criminal career. For Nemesio, it was the beginning. During his years in an American federal penitentiary, Nemesio received an education that no university could provide. He learned English. He studied how American law enforcement operated. He observed the strengths and weaknesses of the justice system. He made connections with other drug traffickers from Mexico, Colombia, and Central America. He learned about supply chains, about distribution networks, about money laundering techniques. He learned how international drug trafficking really worked at the highest levels. When he was released and deported back to Mexico in the late 1990s, Nemesio was a different man. He was no longer a small-time dealer from a dusty village. He was a strategist with international experience and a burning ambition to build something that would make the world take notice. Back in Mexico, Nemesio did something unexpected. He became a police officer. He joined a local police force in Jalisco, and for a brief period he wore a badge and carried a gun legally. This wasn't a change of heart. It was a calculated move. As a police officer, he learned tactics. He learned about weapons and surveillance. He learned how law enforcement communicated and coordinated operations. He learned about the networks of corruption that connected police, military officials, and politicians to the drug trade. He learned who could be bought and who couldn't. And most importantly, he learned how the system worked from the inside. When he left the police force, he took all of that knowledge with him. Nemesio then joined the Mencho Cartel, a drug trafficking organization based in Jalisco that had connections to the powerful Sinaloa cartel. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was born in the 1960s in a small rural community in Aguililla, Michoacán. This is deep Mexico, not the tourist Mexico of beach resorts and ancient pyramids. This is the Mexico of dirt roads, adobe houses, and families who survive by working the land with their bare hands. Nemesio's parents were farmers. They grew whatever the land would give them, and they struggled every single day to put food on the table. There was no electricity. There was no running water. There was no school worth attending. There were no opportunities. There was nothing except the land and the stories. The stories were about men who had found another way to make money. Men who grew marijuana in the mountains and sold it to traffickers who moved it north to the United States. Men who had cars and houses and respect. Men who had power in a place where the government had none. Young Nemesio heard those stories, and they planted a seed in his mind that would grow into something the world had never seen before. He dropped out of school as a teenager to help his parents on the farm, but farming avocados and limes paid almost nothing. The real money was in the mountains, where marijuana and poppy fields stretched across hidden valleys guarded by armed men. Nemesio started working the edges of this world. He guarded plantations. He ran errands for local traffickers. He watched and he learned. He saw how the criminals lived compared to the farmers. He saw the difference between power and poverty, and he made his choice. In the 1980s, Nemesio crossed the border into the United States illegally. He used fake names and false documents to stay under the radar. He settled in California's Central Valley, where a large community of Mexican immigrants provided cover. But Nemesio didn't come to pick crops. He came to sell drugs. He started dealing heroin and methamphetamine, building connections with local distributors, and establishing a small but profitable network. On February 22, 2026, the Mexican government announced that they had killed the most wanted man in the entire country. The man who had a $15 million bounty on his head. The man who had evaded capture for over a decade while building the most violent criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. The man whose name alone could shut down entire cities and send millions of people running indoors. His name was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. The world knew him as El Mencho. He was the supreme leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, and for years he was considered untouchable. The DEA called him the most dangerous drug trafficker on the planet. The Mexican government called him their #1 priority. Intelligence agencies across the world had been hunting him for years. And on that Sunday morning in the mountains of Jalisco, a military operation changed everything. But here is what nobody expected. His death did not bring peace. It brought fire. Within hours of the announcement, cars were burning on highways across Mexico. Supermarkets were set ablaze. Government buildings were attacked. Roads were blocked with flaming barricades. Public transportation was shut down. Hotels told their guests to stay inside. Embassies warned their citizens not to leave their rooms. It was as if someone had pulled the pin on a grenade and the entire country was waiting for the explosion. This is the complete story of how Mexico's most wanted drug lord was finally brought down, what happened in the hours and days after his death, and why his elimination might have made everything more dangerous than before. This is a story about power, about violence, about the limits of military force, and about a country that has been trapped in a war it cannot seem to win. And it starts in a dusty village in the mountains of Michoacán over 60 years ago.